Linda Carson is a woman who has always gotten used to getting what she wants. She is 52 years old, successful, and owns a chain of beauty salons throughout California. In the past, Linda has had stormy romantic relationships, but none of the men stayed with her for long. Now she is single, but her life is not without entertainment. She loves rich parties, expensive cars, and young company. Recently, Linda began to think that her life is too empty, and it is at this point that she decides to enter into a relationship with someone who will not only be devoted to her, but also young. At one of the exclusive parties in Los Angeles, Linda meets Anthony Roberts, a handsome 28-year-old man. Anthony is working as a bartender at the event, and his charm, easy communication, and attractive appearance immediately attract Linda's attention. He communicates a lot with the guests, flirts with women, and Linda is no exception. However, unlike others, she knows how to get what she wants. Linda is not just interested in one night. She wants more. She sees Anthony as an ideal partner to whom she can offer money and a luxurious lifestyle in exchange for his attention and youth. As the evening draws to a close, Linda approaches Anthony, compliments him generously, and offers to exchange phone numbers. Her confidence and status immediately impress Anthony. He is not used to such attention from wealthy women, especially from women like Linda. Her chic dress, expensive jewelry, and impeccable appearance leave him in awe. The next day, Linda sends Anthony a text message first, inviting him to meet. She intends to act quickly and decisively. They meet at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. During dinner, Linda tells him about her successful career, hinting that she can help him in life. Anthony, realizing that this affair can change his destiny, shows interest. He likes the idea of living in luxury, and Linda promises him exactly that. After dinner, Linda invites Anthony to join her at her mansion, and he accepts. At the beachfront mansion in Malibu, Linda continues to charm him, showing off her home, her expensive collections, and the beautiful life he can have with her. Anthony becomes increasingly attached to her, seeing the prospects that this relationship can open up. However, Linda is not just looking for a young lover. She wants complete control over his life. Linda begins to give Anthony expensive gifts, watches, a car, clothes. She does everything to make him feel dependent on her. Anthony accepts these gifts with joy, believing that he has finally found an easy way to live beautifully, but does not understand that he has already fallen into Linda's trap. Anthony doesn't realize that his life is slowly but surely beginning to revolve around Linda. She becomes not just a woman for him, but someone who controls every aspect of his life. Linda, in turn, is convinced that she has found the perfect partner to manipulate, and does not notice how her affection is growing into a dangerous obsession. The first part of the story brings the viewer to the key moment. The seemingly perfect relationship is in fact the beginning of manipulations that will lead to disaster in the future. Linda is playing a dangerous game, and this is only the beginning of her plan, in which Anthony becomes a victim of her desire to completely control her life. In this scenario, it is very important to emphasize that Linda is not only rich and self-confident, but also very cunning. Her ability to manipulate people and create the illusion of an ideal relationship will become the main theme of the story. Several months have passed since Linda and Anthony began their relationship. Anthony enjoys a life of luxury, yacht trips, expensive restaurants, gifts of designer clothes and watches that he could never afford. Linda showers him with attention and care, and at first glance, everything seems perfect. However, Linda becomes increasingly controlling, and her demands on Anthony gradually increase. She does not tolerate Anthony spending time with friends or even family. Every minute of his time must be devoted to her. Linda tries to control who he communicates with, where he spends time, and becomes jealous of anything that distracts him from her. Anthony, although he enjoys the material side of the relationship, begins to feel pressure. He likes freedom, and Linda increasingly limits him in this. One evening, when Linda is busy with business meetings, Anthony decides to meet his friends at a bar. He enjoys the company of his peers, who envy his successful life with a sugar mommy. During this meeting, his friends encourage him to have an affair, joking that life with Linda is too boring and that he needs some fun. At this point, Rebecca Johnson, an attractive and cheerful girl who turns out to be an acquaintance of one of Anthony's friends, appears on the horizon. Rebecca does not know that Anthony is in a relationship with Linda and, naturally, begins to flirt with him. Her youth and ease attract Anthony, and he begins to return her attention. Rebecca and Anthony spend the evening together, their conversations becoming increasingly personal and flirtatious. Anthony, fueled by alcohol and flattering compliments from his friends, forgets about Linda and enjoys the moment. Later in the evening, on impulse, Anthony and Rebecca go off on their own. It is Linda's first betrayal, but he thinks she will never know. The next day, Anthony returns to Linda, acting as if nothing had happened. But something inside him has already changed. He feels guilty, but at the same time, he realizes that he is beginning to want to live a freer life, perhaps even to have a relationship with someone younger and more like him, like Rebecca. Meanwhile, Linda suspects nothing, although she notices that Anthony has become a little distant. However, Linda Carson is not a woman who can be easily deceived. Her intuition tells her that something is wrong. She begins to notice that Anthony has begun to pay less attention to her, sometimes stays away from home, and his behavior changes. This does not escape her eyes. Linda begins to check Anthony's phone, looking for signs of his infidelity, but so far she has not found anything concrete. However, her jealousy and suspicion grow, and she begins to follow his every move. Linda decides not to show her jealousy right away. She prefers to observe and gather information. Outwardly, she remains caring and attentive, continuing to shower Anthony with gifts and attention, but her inner state has already begun to change. Her mind is gradually filled with plans for revenge. Soon, Linda hires a private detective to follow Anthony. She wants to know the whole truth and be ready to act when the time comes. The detective begins to follow Anthony, recording his meetings with Rebecca. Linda receives the first photos of their secret dates, and her anger reaches its peak. However, she decides not to give in to her emotions for now. Linda understands that she must carefully plan her next move. She intends to ruin not only Rebecca's life, but also to completely subjugate Anthony, making him regret every step. Meanwhile, Anthony is enjoying his new relationship with Rebecca. He continues to hide it from Linda, convincing himself that he is coping with the situation. But he does not suspect that his life will soon change. Linda will not forgive him for this betrayal. Rebecca, unsuspecting, also plunges into the relationship, believing that she has found the perfect guy. However, their happiness is short-lived. Linda is preparing to strike back, which will destroy their lives. This part of the story highlights the beginning of the conflict, where cracks first appear in Linda and Anthony's relationship. The plot is built on the contradiction between the calm surface and the heated inner world of Linda, who, although she keeps herself in check, is already planning a harsh response to the betrayal. Linda Carson, realizing Anthony's betrayal and his affair with Rebecca Johnson, decides to take action. She can no longer tolerate this deception, but she acts coldly and calculatingly so that no one will suspect her of intending to take revenge. Her plan is not just to break up with Anthony, but to ruin the lives of both lovers. Linda begins a plot that will slowly destroy their relationship, and in such a way that Anthony will not guess that she is behind all this. Linda's first step is to strengthen her bond with Anthony. She decides to suppress her jealousy for a while and become even more caring and generous. Linda arranges a luxurious weekend in Las Vegas, where the couple spends time in five-star hotels, dines in elite restaurants, and attends expensive events. It seems that Linda is trying to restore the former passion in the relationship, but in her heart there is already malice and a plan to destroy her young lover. After returning from this perfect weekend, Linda turns on her private detective again. She wants to know everything: where Anthony and Rebecca meet, what their plans are, and most importantly, what Anthony says about her behind her back. Linda is in no hurry to act. She is waiting for the right moment to begin destroying their relationship from the inside. Linda's next step is manipulation through psychological pressure. She begins to sow doubts in Anthony's head, subtly undermining his trust in Rebecca. Linda uses every little thing: casual conversations about how young girls often use successful men for their own gain, innocent hints that Anthony deserves a better and more devoted partner. She does it carefully, never criticizing Rebecca directly, but enough to make Anthony think. Linda knows that if even the slightest doubt is born in his head, it will be the beginning of the end. Meanwhile, Linda continues to follow Rebecca. She decides to find the weak points in her life and use them against her. The detective provides Linda with information that Rebecca works for a small marketing agency and lives in a rented apartment with roommates. Linda realizes that she can use her work as leverage. She contacts influential clients of the agency and discreetly spreads rumors that Rebecca is unreliable and dishonest. After a few weeks, Rebecca begins to have problems at work, and her superiors begin to increasingly criticize her work. Linda also uses anonymous messages and fake evidence to make Anthony believe that Rebecca is cheating on him. One day, Anthony receives a message from an unknown number saying that Rebecca has been seen with another man. The message comes with a blurry photo that is barely visible, but it is enough for Anthony to suspect something is wrong. The doubts that Linda has planted begin to deepen, and the first quarrels between Anthony and Rebecca occur. Rebecca notices that something has changed in Anthony's behavior. He becomes suspicious, avoids conversations, and increasingly asks questions about her past. Rebecca does not understand where these doubts come from, because in her opinion, their relationship was wonderful. Linda watches this from the sidelines, happy as her plan begins to work. She knows that this is only the beginning of destruction and is ready to move on. However, Linda does not stop at manipulating Anthony. She begins to stalk Rebecca personally, arranging accidental meetings. One day, Linda accidentally runs into Rebecca in one of the expensive stores and pretends not to recognize her. She behaves friendly, but her smile is full of falsehood. Rebecca feels awkward since she did not know that Linda even knew about her existence. Linda, in turn, enjoys her game, knowing that this is only the beginning of a larger conspiracy. Thus begins Linda's subtle psychological game, aimed at the complete destruction of Anthony and Rebecca's lives. Her actions become increasingly sophisticated, and she is confident that she can achieve her goal without leaving any traces that could indicate her involvement. Linda is ready to do anything to maintain her power and destroy those who dare to stand in her way. Over time, the tension between Anthony and Rebecca only increases. After repeated accusations and suspicions from Anthony, their relationship slowly begins to crumble. Each time Rebecca tries to find out the reason for his aggressive behavior, he becomes more withdrawn and suspicious. Anthony sinks deeper into paranoia, caused by Linda's skillful manipulation. Meanwhile, Linda continues her game with masterful precision. Her cunning and cold-bloodedness turn all this into a carefully planned drama. Now, she not only controls Anthony through jealousy, but also creates conflict within his new relationship, causing it to crumble before his eyes. Soon Linda realizes that it is time for more drastic action. Her strategy of pitting the lovers against each other is beginning to bear fruit, but she wants to speed things up. She decides to arrange a chance meeting to openly interfere in their relationship and force them both to confront her presence in their lives. The plan is to make Anthony and Rebecca realize that Linda is always there and that she cannot be erased from their lives so easily. One evening, Linda sends Anthony a text message asking him to go to dinner at one of their favorite restaurants. She knows that Rebecca is planning a date with him at the same time. Linda does everything she can to make Anthony choose her over Rebecca, knowing that it will cause a storm of emotions for both of them. Anthony agrees to meet Linda, leaving Rebecca bewildered. At the moment of meeting, he does not suspect that Linda has something more planned. As soon as they sit down at a table in a restaurant, Linda begins a conversation about how much she has done for him, how much she loves him, and how deeply she values him. She reminds him of expensive gifts, trips, and the moments they spent together. Her words are filled with subtle hints of devotion and obligation that Anthony now feels towards her. He finds himself thinking that Linda may have been right, that she has always been with him, while Rebecca is just a passing fancy. Meanwhile, Rebecca, realizing that Anthony is ignoring her again for Linda, decides to go to the restaurant herself to see what's going on. She finds Anthony and Linda together at dinner, their faces deep in confidential conversation, and the atmosphere between them is clearly tense. This comes as a shock to Rebecca. She was sure that Anthony had ended his relationship with Linda, but here they are again together. Rebecca can't help herself and approaches their table. From this point on, the confrontation begins. Linda greets her with icy calm, while Anthony, taken aback, doesn't know what to do. Rebecca begins asking questions, demanding an explanation as to why Anthony is dating Linda again. Her voice is full of hurt and pain. She feels betrayed. Anthony, caught between the two women, tries to make excuses, but his indecision becomes obvious. He is confused about his feelings and does not understand which of them he really wants. Linda at this point adds fuel to the fire, telling Rebecca with false regret, "Honey, I think you are too young to understand that men need stability, and I am the stability in his life." These words make Rebecca furious. She understands that Linda has been playing with them all this time, manipulating their relationship, and Anthony was just a puppet in her hands. She demands Anthony to make a choice right here and now. Anthony, feeling pressure from both sides, cannot find a suitable answer. He is internally divided between the comfort that Linda gives him and his true feelings for Rebecca. Linda, seeing his doubts, gently places her hand on his shoulder and whispers, "You know who really cares about you." This moment becomes a turning point. Rebecca, seeing that Anthony cannot decide, leaves in tears, feeling completely disappointed and betrayed. Linda, watching this, enjoys her victory. She has achieved her goal. She has destroyed the relationship of the young lovers, sowing doubts and mistrust in their minds. Anthony, staying with Linda, feels devastated. He knows he just lost Rebecca, but he is not sure if he made the right choice. Linda is sure that she now has complete control over him, and her next move will be the final blow to their lives. This section reveals the open confrontation that Linda has skillfully provoked, further deepening the conflict between the lovers and setting the stage for further destructive actions. After the painful scene at the restaurant, Rebecca begins to feel broken. Her relationship with Anthony is shattered, and she feels shadows gathering around her. She can no longer ignore Linda's presence in her life. This woman she barely knew has destroyed her happiness, and now she can't shake the nagging feeling that Linda is still out there, watching her every move. Rebecca begins to notice strange things happening around her. Her phone calls are often interrupted as if someone is listening. One day, when she comes home, she notices that her apartment door is slightly open, although she clearly remembers closing it. At work, she begins to receive anonymous messages with hints about her personal life, containing phrases like, "You don't know who you're playing with, and you'll soon regret what you did." Rebecca knows that Linda is behind it, but she has no proof. Her paranoia begins to grow. Every time Rebecca goes outside, she feels like she is being followed. She notices the same car parking near her house or following her at work. But when she tries to get closer or get the license plate, the car always drives away. This feeling of constant surveillance and threat begins to destroy her nervous system. She loses concentration at work. Her colleagues notice that she constantly looks scared and anxious. Rebecca decides to talk to Anthony, hoping that at least he can help her understand what is happening. However, their conversation does not bring relief. Anthony, already immersed in his dependence on Linda and under her influence, does not believe Rebecca's words. He believes that she is simply exaggerating and dramatizing the situation. For him, Linda is a source of stability and luxury, and Rebecca now seems to him only a problem that brings only stress and reproaches. He refuses to help her, which further undermines Rebecca's trust in him. Desperate, Rebecca decides to go to the police. She goes to the station, tells them her suspicions and that she is probably being followed. However, the police do not take her seriously. She has no evidence, only her words and guesses. They suggest that she change the locks and watch for suspicious activity, but do not take any real action. Rebecca leaves, feeling even more vulnerable and defenseless. Meanwhile, Linda continues to increase her psychological pressure. She understands that Rebecca is already on the edge and decides to bring her to complete emotional exhaustion. Linda begins to regularly appear in the places where Rebecca goes, pretending that their meetings are accidental. One day, in the parking lot near work, Rebecca sees Linda sitting in her luxury car. Linda smiles at her through the window, but says nothing. This silence, accompanied by a cold look, frightens Rebecca more than any words. Each encounter becomes painful for Rebecca. She begins to feel that her life is not just falling apart, it is being actively destroyed. Linda turns her world into a nightmare, gradually squeezing all hope and self-confidence out of her. Things are also getting worse for Rebecca at work. Her bosses are becoming more demanding, her projects are starting to fail, and her colleagues are increasingly complaining about her inattention and strange behavior. Linda, using her connections, is doing everything to undermine her reputation in the company. Rebecca is afraid that she might be fired, but she does not have the strength to fight on all fronts. Anthony, still under Linda's influence, communicates less and less with Rebecca. He ignores her calls and messages, completely immersed in his relationship with Linda. His betrayal and lack of support finally finishes Rebecca off. She feels lonely and isolated, as if the whole world is against her. At this most difficult moment, Rebecca decides that she can no longer live in fear. She begins to look for a way out and thinks about leaving the city, leaving everything behind and starting a new life. But she does not have many resources, and she is not sure that she can escape from Linda's persecution. Every day becomes torture for her, and she no longer knows who to trust. In this part, Linda takes complete control of the situation, creating an atmosphere of fear and persecution. Rebecca gradually finds herself trapped, her world crumbling before her eyes, and she realizes that she has virtually no chance against Linda. After months of being trapped emotionally and psychologically, Anthony finally finds himself under Linda Carson's complete control. He no longer sees a way out, feeling that his life is closed around her, and any attempt to leave will lead to even more problems. Linda continues to confidently manipulate him, and her methods become more cunning and sophisticated. However, Linda realizes that simply controlling Anthony is not enough. She longs for complete certainty that no one and nothing can break her power over him. A new plan is maturing in her head. She decides to deal the final blow to Rebecca in order to get rid of her forever. Linda believes that as long as Rebecca is alive and there is even the slightest connection between her and Anthony, her power over him remains under threat. Linda begins a new stage of the game. This time her goal is not just to control Anthony, but to destroy his past. She is sure that the only way to make Anthony completely forget about Rebecca is to ruin her life to such an extent that he will never want to return to her under any circumstances. Linda's first step is an information attack on Rebecca. Using her connections and influence, she decides to discredit Rebecca in her professional and personal life. Linda begins to spread rumors about Rebecca among her colleagues and superiors. She arranges for Rebecca to make mistakes at work. For example, she sends a person who deliberately provides her with incorrect data for an important project. As a result, Rebecca receives serious comments from her superiors, and her professional reputation begins to rapidly decline. Rebecca, already in a state of emotional exhaustion, knows that her career is in jeopardy, but she has no idea that Linda is behind it. She thinks that this is just an unfortunate streak in her life, coinciding with her personal problems. But Linda continues to press. She organizes anonymous complaints against Rebecca from dissatisfied clients of the agency, forcing the management to look at her with increasing distrust. In addition, Linda begins to interfere more actively in Rebecca's personal life. She sends anonymous letters and messages to her friends, which reveal personal details of her past relationship with Anthony. Linda tries to portray Rebecca as a manipulator who used the young man for her own benefit. Gradually, Rebecca's friends begin to distance themselves from her, not knowing who to believe. More and more people around her begin to doubt her honesty. Rebecca is trying to hold on, but she feels like her world is falling apart. She's losing friends, her career is in jeopardy, and her love life is a nightmare. She's constantly stressed and anxious, and it feels like there's a threat around every corner. Her mental state is deteriorating, and she's starting to suspect that Linda might be behind it all, but she doesn't know how to prove it. Meanwhile, Linda continues to tighten her grip on Anthony. She convinces him that Rebecca is the source of all his problems. She tells him that as long as Rebecca is alive, they can never be truly happy. Linda skillfully manipulates his feelings of guilt and dependency, turning his past love for Rebecca into a source of fear and mistrust. Anthony begins to believe that Rebecca really was using him and that their relationship was a mistake. He falls completely under Linda's influence, who gradually instills in him the idea that Rebecca is a threat to their future. However, Linda does not stop there. She decides to go further and prepare for the physical elimination of Rebecca from their lives. To do this, she begins to look for ways to bring Rebecca to complete collapse in order to get rid of her forever. Linda plans the next stage of her sinister plot, which should be the culmination of her plan to completely destroy Rebecca. Linda decides to use the help of a hired man to bring her dark intentions to life. She finds someone who is willing to do the dirty work for money. Linda plans to do everything so that no one will guess about her involvement in Rebecca's disappearance. She wants everything to look like an accident or suicide, which is provoked by the growing problems in Rebecca's life. Anthony, being emotionally and psychologically dependent on Linda, does not even guess what she plans to do. He is still sure that Linda is his only support and source of stability in life, but he does not realize that he has become a puppet in her hands, and that now Linda is ready to go to extreme measures to get rid of his past. In this part, Linda moves on to a darker and more drastic plan. She aims to completely destroy Rebecca's life and pave the way for her final elimination while continuing to manipulate Anthony, who remains completely unaware of what lies ahead. With each passing day, Linda Carson becomes more and more obsessed with controlling Anthony's life. Her plan to destroy Rebecca is approaching its final stage, and she is ready to do anything to eliminate her rival once and for all. Linda's obsession begins to go beyond simple jealousy. She perceives Rebecca as a threat to her existence, as an obstacle that must be eliminated at any cost. Meanwhile, Rebecca continues to fight for her survival as everything around her collapses. Her career is in tatters, her friends have turned their backs, and she feels on edge. But despite this, Rebecca is determined not to go down without a fight. She begins to gather evidence that Linda is behind all of her misfortunes. Gradually, her suspicions become stronger, and she begins to realize that Linda is behind every blow that has struck her life. Rebecca decides to hire a private detective to begin her own investigation. She suspects that Linda has hired people to spy on her and ruin her reputation. The detective begins collecting evidence by recording Linda's movements and those around her. Meanwhile, Rebecca decides to quit her job to focus on her plan to expose Linda and regain control of her life. Linda, unaware that she is being tracked, continues to increase the pressure. Her manipulation of Anthony reaches a new level. She now not only controls his life, but also tries to turn him into an active participant in her plan. Linda begins to instill in Anthony the idea that Rebecca is their common enemy, who must be eliminated. She ruined you. She's keeping us from being happy. You have to finally understand that, Anthony, Linda says, looking him straight in the eyes. Her words penetrate deep into Anthony's mind, and he begins to believe that Rebecca is indeed to blame for all of his problems. Linda continues to reinforce his feelings of guilt and hatred, constantly reminding him how much she has done for him and how much Rebecca has taken from him. Anthony, already completely confused in his feelings, increasingly begins to agree with Linda. His internal conflict between his love for Rebecca and his devotion to Linda becomes unbearable. Under Linda's influence, he increasingly leans toward the idea that Rebecca should disappear from their lives. Linda continues to lay the groundwork for her final move. She meets with a hired criminal whom she plans to hire to do her dirty work. Linda wants it to look like an accident or suicide so the police won't suspect her of involvement. She carefully plans every detail to remove Rebecca from Anthony's life for good, but to remain in the shadows. However, despite all her control over the situation, Linda begins to lose touch with reality. Her obsession with Rebecca and control over Anthony reaches its peak. She stops seeing the boundaries between moral and immoral actions. Now nothing exists for her except the goal, to eliminate her rival and keep Anthony by her side at any cost. Meanwhile, Anthony senses that something is wrong with Linda. He notices that her behavior is becoming increasingly nervous and unpredictable. She talks about Rebecca more and more often, even when it is inappropriate, and her aggression is growing. Linda no longer controls herself as much as before, and this is starting to frighten Anthony. One evening, after a tense conversation about Rebecca, Anthony decides to meet Rebecca secretly to understand what is going on. He feels that he is on the edge and can no longer live with constant stress and Linda's control. However, he does not realize that Linda is watching his every move. When Anthony meets Rebecca, they begin to discuss what is happening. Rebecca tells him about her suspicions about Linda and how she has ruined her life. She reveals details that shock Anthony, from anonymous messages to interference in her work and relationships with friends. Anthony begins to realize that Linda is indeed capable of everything Rebecca says. At this point, he realizes that he has become a victim of manipulation. Anthony begins to realize that his own life is at risk if he continues to stay with Linda. He decides that he must break off relations with her before it is too late. However, he does not know that Linda has already planned her final blow and that she is ready to take decisive action. This section shows the culmination of Linda's obsession and how her control over Anthony begins to break down. Anthony finally begins to understand that Linda is a danger, but it may be too late to escape her destructive actions. Anthony, realizing that his relationship with Linda is ruining his life, decides to distance himself from her and try to regain control. After meeting Rebecca, he feels exhausted and confused, but for the first time in a long time, he sees light at the end of the tunnel. He now knows that Linda has been lying to him and manipulating him from the very beginning. His decision to end this toxic relationship is now complete, but he knows that it won't be easy because Linda will never let him go without a fight. Anthony returns to Linda's home with the intention of having a heart-to-heart talk and trying to leave without too much drama. Little does he know, however, that Linda has already suspected that he was seeing Rebecca. She has been closely monitoring his movements and knows that her influence is waning. Linda feels herself losing control and her mind is in a panic. She is not going to let Anthony leave and knows she must act quickly to keep him. That evening, after Anthony returns home, Linda greets him with unusual calm. She pretends that everything is fine, asking him the standard questions about his day. But in her eyes, Anthony sees something new, an underlying tension bordering on madness. He decides that he can't put off the conversation any longer and finally sits down opposite Linda. "We need to talk," Anthony begins, trying to sound as confident as possible. He explains that he needs time and space to sort out his feelings. He claims that they would both be better off if they took a break from their relationship. But before he can finish speaking, he realizes that Linda is not going to listen to him. Her face changes from a soft smile to an expression of icy anger. Linda responds in a cold tone that cuts the air. "You think you can leave me so easily? After everything I've done for you?" She begins to remind him of the money, the luxurious life she provided him, how she saved him from poverty and a worthless existence. Linda does everything to make Anthony feel guilty, emphasizing his dependence on her. But Anthony is no longer susceptible to her manipulations. He firmly replies that he wants to end the relationship and that it is not about money. He admits that he knows about her interference in his life, that she controlled his every move and destroyed his relationship with Rebecca. Anthony's words hit Linda like a knife. Her obsession and plans crumble before her eyes. But instead of resigning herself, Linda becomes even more furious. She starts yelling at Anthony, accusing him of betrayal, saying that he is ungrateful and that she is the only one who truly loves him. Linda threatens that if he leaves, she will make his life hell. Anthony sees that her madness has reached its peak and realizes that there is no point in talking to her. He decides to leave immediately. When Anthony tries to leave the house, Linda doesn't stop. She throws herself at him, begging him to stay, her hands shaking and her voice breaking. At that moment, a dangerous determination appears in her eyes. She no longer sees Anthony as the man she loves. Now he is simply an object she must hold on to at any cost. Anthony manages to break free and leave the house, but Linda does not give up. She understands that if he leaves, her power over him will disappear forever. Linda calls her hired gun, whom she has already paid to do the dirty work. In a panic, she gives the order to speed up the plan to eliminate Rebecca, convinced that if Rebecca is gone, Anthony will return to her. Meanwhile, Rebecca, unaware of the impending threat, returns home after a day of stress and anxiety. She feels devastated but does not yet know that her life will soon be in real danger. That evening, she decides to call Anthony to find out how his conversation with Linda went. Her heart is pounding with fear and uncertainty, but she hopes that Anthony has decided to break up and that she has a chance to get him back. When Anthony receives a call from Rebecca, he feels relieved. He tells her about the scene that happened with Linda and says that he has finally decided to break off the relationship. But at this moment, both of them do not yet suspect that Linda's plan to eliminate Rebecca is already in action. Anthony promises to meet Rebecca the next day to discuss next steps. However, when he hangs up, he begins to worry. He realizes that Linda will not stop easily. Her obsession is too great, and he fears that she is capable of something terrible. Anthony decides that he must protect Rebecca at all costs. He cannot allow Linda to carry out her plan. Now, his main task is to prevent a catastrophe before it is too late. This part of the script shows Linda finally losing control of her emotions, moving to active measures to eliminate Rebecca. Anthony finally understands the danger Linda poses, but he must prevent the tragedy that is already looming. Anthony, stunned after his conversation with Linda and realizing that his life is literally hanging by a thread, decides not to waste time. He understands that Linda, in a state of emotional and mental collapse, is capable of anything. Her words and behavior make it clear that she will not stop until she destroys Rebecca. This knowledge pushes him to decisive action. Anthony realizes that he can no longer simply defend himself. He now needs to be proactive in protecting Rebecca. He calls her again, explaining the situation in detail. "You're in danger, Rebecca. I know Linda hired someone to hurt you," he says, his voice tense. Rebecca can't believe what's happening at first, but Anthony's voice and the gravity of the situation convince her of the reality of the threat. They agree to meet in a safe place to discuss what to do next. Rebecca realizes that staying home is too dangerous. Her fear grows, but she tries to remain calm. She quickly gathers the essentials and goes to meet Anthony. Meanwhile, Linda is already putting her plan into action. She contacts the hitman she hired earlier to finish the job as quickly as possible. She thinks that by eliminating Rebecca, she can bring Anthony back under her control and hide any consequences. Her obsession and sense of control have clouded her common sense, and she can no longer see the boundaries between reality and her manipulations. However, Linda has no idea that Rebecca has already started her own investigation. The private detective she hired has found several clues linking Linda to illegal activity and provided Rebecca with the information she needed. The detective also found out that Linda hired a criminal to physically eliminate Rebecca. With these new facts, Rebecca decides to hand over all the information to the police, knowing that this may be her only chance to stop Linda. Anthony and Rebecca meet in a small cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. Both are on edge and the atmosphere is tense. Anthony shares his plan with Rebecca. He knows Linda will never let him leave unless something drastic happens. They decide to call the police and provide all the evidence they have gathered to stop Linda before she can hurt anyone. Meanwhile, Linda has lost touch with reality. Her actions are becoming increasingly dangerous. She threatens Anthony over the phone, trying to get him to come back to her, and hints that Rebecca's time is running out. She makes no secret of her intentions, and there is an icy determination in her voice. Anthony realizes that Linda knows about his meeting with Rebecca. He decides to act immediately. Together with Rebecca, they go to the police station to hand over all the evidence. They know that they have little time before Linda carries out her dark plan. The police, having received information, begin to act. Detectives begin an investigation aimed at Linda and quickly establish her involvement in the planning of the crime. Linda is placed under surveillance, but her behavior becomes increasingly unpredictable. When Linda learns that the police have intervened, her world completely collapses. She realizes that she has lost control of the situation and falls into a state of panic. Linda tries to escape, but her actions have already been recorded and the police are following her. Anthony and Rebecca remain in hiding, knowing they have done everything they can to protect themselves from Linda. However, they remain in fear for their lives. They do not know what Linda is capable of in her last despair. Linda continues to try to contact Anthony, sending him messages, begging him to come back and threatening him if he refuses. Meanwhile, the hired criminal Linda has hired is instructed to carry out the job. However, due to police intervention, his actions are under surveillance. The police manage to apprehend him before he can carry out his plan. This becomes a decisive moment in preventing a catastrophe. When Linda realizes that her plan has failed and the police already know about everything, she decides to take one last desperate step. She goes to Rebecca's house to meet Anthony and Rebecca face to face, hoping to fix the situation by force. Linda does not realize that this will be the end of her obsession and control. This part of the script shows a tense development of events when Anthony and Rebecca decide to act proactively to stop Linda. The police are involved and Linda's actions get out of control. Linda Carson rushes to Rebecca's house in a panic. She realizes that her plan has failed. The police know of her criminal intentions and Anthony is completely out of her control. Her obsession with Anthony has reached a breaking point. Linda feels she has no choice but to confront Anthony and Rebecca face to face to try to get the situation back under control. She is confident that she can once again convince Anthony to come back to her using the same manipulations that worked before. Meanwhile, Anthony and Rebecca are in hiding, waiting for the police to act. They realize that the situation is becoming increasingly dangerous and that Linda is ready to take extreme measures. The house is unnervingly quiet. Every sound from outside makes them tense. They know that Linda will not stop until she meets them in person. Linda pulls up to Rebecca's house and without hesitation kicks down the door, startling them. She storms inside, her eyes blazing with rage and madness. Linda no longer tries to hide her true nature. She goes from manipulation to outright threat. "You thought you could leave me," she screams at Anthony, her voice full of rage. "I gave you everything and you betrayed me for her." Anthony understands that persuasion is useless. Linda is already beyond the bounds of logic, and attempts to calm her down will lead to nothing. But despite all the danger, he decides to try to distract Linda, hoping that the police will have time to intervene. He says, "Linda, this is the end. Your power over me is over. You can't go on like this." But his words only add fuel to the fire. Linda walks towards Rebecca, her face twisted in hatred. "You ruined everything," she screams, coming closer. Rebecca, frozen with fear, cannot move, her breathing quickening. Anthony throws himself between them, trying to protect Rebecca, and at that moment Linda pulls a knife out of her pocket, clearly intending to attack Rebecca. A fierce struggle ensues between the two. Anthony attempts to disarm Linda, but her powers are fueled by rage and desperation. Everything happens so quickly that neither Anthony nor Rebecca have time to react. Linda stabs Anthony in the arm when he tries to stop her, but he continues to fight, trying to protect Rebecca. At that very moment, the police burst into the house. Their quick action saves the day. The officers immediately disarm Linda and arrest her, although she continues to scream at Anthony and Rebecca, accusing them of betraying her and ruining her life. Linda is escorted out of the house, but her words still echo in their heads. "I did it for you. You can't just leave." Anthony is breathing heavily, still recovering from the struggle. Rebecca approaches him, shaking with fear and shock, but in that moment they both realize that they are finally free of Linda and her influence. The officers give Anthony first aid and check his wound, which is fortunately not fatal. Linda, now under arrest, is fully aware that it is all over. Her obsession, her desire to control Anthony and ruin Rebecca's life have led to her downfall. She can no longer manipulate Anthony or anyone else. She is left alone, surrounded only by her own destructive actions. After Linda's arrest, Anthony and Rebecca can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Their nightmare is over, but the aftermath will be with them for a long time. They both know they've been through something terrible, but it has brought them closer together. Anthony apologizes to Rebecca for what happened and promises that he will never let anyone manipulate his life again. The officers promise that Linda will face justice for her crimes, and they provide Anthony and Rebecca with all the protection they need in case anyone else tries to harm them. They begin a new phase of life, a phase free of manipulation and fear. This part of the script reaches its climax when Linda loses control and goes on the offensive. Police intervention prevents tragedy, but demonstrates how far a person under the influence of obsession and control can go. After Linda Carson's arrest, Anthony and Rebecca's lives begin to improve. They feel a sense of relief that the nightmare is finally over. However, the aftermath of what happened leaves a deep mark on their lives. Even though Linda is in custody, her presence still hangs over them like a shadow. Both know that the road to full recovery will be long and difficult. Anthony, whose life has been under Linda's complete control for months, begins to realize the depth of his emotional and psychological exhaustion. He feels guilty for allowing Linda to control him and for the way her obsession has endangered Rebecca's and his own lives. These feelings haunt him. Even though Linda can no longer physically harm them, her manipulation and influence remain etched in his memory. Rebecca, in turn, is faced with the consequences of the nervous tension and fear that have haunted her for all these months. She suffers from post-traumatic stress after numerous threats and persecution. She understands that even though Linda has been arrested, she still has a long way to go to start trusting people and feeling safe again. Rebecca decides to temporarily leave the city and move in with her relatives to recover from everything that happened. Before she leaves, however, Anthony insists that they meet again. He feels he must apologize to her and discuss what will happen next. They meet in the park, where the warm sun seems to try to soften the tension and anxiety that still lingers between them. Anthony sits down across from Rebecca and begins the conversation with a heavy sigh. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I'm so sorry. I didn't see what Linda was doing to us. I let her control my life, and that led us to this horror." His voice trembles with emotion. He fears that his mistakes have lost Rebecca forever. Rebecca, though hurt and disappointed, understands that Anthony was a victim of Linda's manipulation. She sees how hard it is for him, and despite everything that has happened, her feelings for him have not faded. "Anthony, I know you didn't mean any of this, but we both need time to heal. This situation will change us forever, and I don't know if I can ever go back to the way things were before." Anthony nods, knowing that her words are true. They both need healing, both emotionally and psychologically. They understand that it will take time to find balance and trust again, but they also know that this journey may be too difficult to take together. Rebecca and Anthony decide that it is best to separate for now and give each other space to process their experiences. Despite their mutual affection, they understand that their paths must temporarily diverge. Anthony promises Rebecca that he will work on himself so that he never lets anyone manipulate his life again. As they say goodbye, they both feel mixed emotions. Relief that Linda's nightmare is finally over, but also sadness that their own story may have come to an end too. However, both know that this was a necessary step to begin a new chapter of life without fear and control. Meanwhile, Linda Carson is in jail awaiting trial. Her condition is deteriorating. Due to deep emotional turmoil and obsession, Linda is beginning to lose her sense of reality. Her obsession with Anthony and her manic desire to get him back have led her to a complete emotional breakdown. Linda no longer sees the boundaries between reality and fantasy. Her mind is confused and plunged into chaos. In her isolation cell, Linda often talks to herself, repeating the same phrases. "I did it for you. You will come back to me. You can't leave." Her condition becomes so serious that prison psychologists begin to evaluate her for mental illness. Everyone who encounters Linda sees emptiness and pain in her eyes. The woman who was once successful and influential has turned into a broken person who has lost everything for her obsession. The investigation continues, and prosecutors are preparing an indictment against Linda Carson. She is accused of attempted murder and multiple counts of stalking and manipulation. She faces a long trial that will likely result in a lengthy prison sentence. For her, this is the final point in her downfall. At this point, a new chapter of their lives begins for Anthony and Rebecca. They are both left with scars from what they have experienced, but at the same time with the understanding that they now have a chance for a future free from Linda's fear and control. Anthony decides that he will work on himself so that he will never again allow someone to manipulate his life. Rebecca, having gone to her family, finds the strength to start a new life, far from the dark events of the past. This part of the script brings us to the emotional denouement, showing how the characters begin to find freedom after all the horrors. However, they realize that the consequences of Linda's possession will haunt them for a long time, despite the fact that she can no longer harm them. Linda Carson's trial is a cause célèbre. Journalists following her story reveal details that shock the public. A successful woman obsessed with controlling her young lover goes so far as to plan the murder of his ex-lover. Linda becomes a symbol of how obsession and jealousy can lead to tragedy. Her actions are widely condemned, and the media interest in her trial only increases the tension surrounding the trial. Linda's first hearing is held in a crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. The charges against her are serious: attempted murder, stalking, and psychological abuse. The prosecution makes its case, presenting ample evidence that Linda has been plotting to eliminate Rebecca for a long time. All of her actions were planned and aimed at one thing: keeping Anthony under her control at any cost. At the trial, Linda appears weakened and emotionally drained. Her appearance is a stark contrast to the confident woman she once was. She now appears more like a lost person who has finally realized the consequences of her actions. Her lawyers are attempting to base their defense on Linda's mental state, arguing that her obsession was caused by serious psychological issues. They argue that Linda needs treatment rather than punishment, arguing that she did not fully understand what her actions would lead to. But prosecutors present a litany of evidence that proves Linda knew what she was doing. Testimony from Anthony and Rebecca, as well as the private investigator Rebecca hired, clearly shows how Linda systematically manipulated the people around her. They describe how she controlled Anthony's life, threatened Rebecca, and even hired a criminal to kill her. All of this information paints Linda as a cold-blooded manipulator who used her money and influence to ruin the lives of others. Anthony, speaking at the trial, tells his story. He admits that he was under Linda's complete control for a long time and did not realize how far she had gone. His words evoke sympathy from the public, as many see him as a victim of manipulation. He describes how Linda first used money and luxury to attract him, and then gradually immersed him in a world of control and fear. His testimony becomes the decisive moment, confirming that Linda acted consciously and with a clear purpose. Rebecca also testifies in court, describing her experiences. She tells how Linda destroyed her career, her personal life, and tried to drive her to despair. Rebecca explains that she endured constant fear and threats, and how at one point she felt like her life would never return to normal. She details how Linda used anonymous threats and spying to destroy her existence. When the court hears the case of hiring a hitman, the situation becomes even more serious for Linda. The police present evidence that she paid a man to eliminate Rebecca. This becomes the culmination of the trial, when everyone understands that Linda was ready to resort to the most radical and cruel measures to achieve her goal. Linda, watching as more and more evidence emerges against her at her trial, begins to realize that her chances of winning are fading. Her obsession with Anthony and her control over the situation have long since slipped out of her control. Now she is confronted with the truth that she has ruined not only Anthony and Rebecca's lives, but her own as well. During one of the hearings, Linda suddenly admits her guilt. She addresses the court and says, "I know what I did. I lost myself because of the fear of losing him, but that doesn't justify hurting others." This confession shocks the courtroom. Everyone understands that Linda has finally realized the depth of her mistakes, although this confession can no longer change her fate. The trial ends and Linda Carson receives a long prison sentence for her crimes. She is sentenced to 25 years without parole. This decision of the court becomes the final point in her story. Now she is deprived of everything she once fought for. The obsession that consumed her led to her collapse, and now she must spend the rest of her life in prison. For Anthony and Rebecca, the trial is a turning point. They can finally move on. Rebecca slowly recovers, finding the strength to start a new life after everything she has been through. Anthony, having let go of his feelings of guilt, begins the process of personal healing, promising himself never to allow someone to control his life like that again. This part of the script concludes the trial story by revealing the consequences of Linda's obsession. Her confession and punishment become the culmination of the long path of destruction she has chosen for herself. Despite Linda Carson's conviction and arrest, her destructive influence has not yet completely disappeared from the lives of Anthony and Rebecca. Linda, plunged into the abyss of her own despair and hatred, remains dangerous even beyond the prison walls. Her obsession lives on, even though she herself can no longer physically threaten her victims. However, as it turns out, her plans were more sophisticated than they seemed at first glance. Anthony, who is trying to get his life back on track after the trial, stays by Rebecca's side. He understands that her concerns are justified. Too much horror has happened in recent months. They both begin to suspect that perhaps someone is still working for Linda or carrying out her final orders. Their fears are confirmed when a stranger shows up at Rebecca's door one evening. He introduces himself as Linda's friend and claims to need to speak to Anthony. The stranger appears tense and persistent, and his behavior arouses suspicion. Anthony and Rebecca refuse to meet, but the man continues to stalk them. It soon emerges that Linda, despite her arrest, left behind several recorded video messages and instructions for this man, her loyal assistant, whom she used as her last line of attack. This man has apparently been Linda's secret ally all along, and now, following her instructions, he intends to see her revenge through to the end. Rebecca increasingly fears for her life. Her nightmares return, and she realizes that Linda, despite being behind bars, still has influence. Unsure how to deal with this threat, Rebecca turns to the police again, but they too cannot give her exact guarantees of safety. They begin an investigation, trying to find this man, but each time he manages to escape, Anthony becomes more and more determined to protect Rebecca. He no longer wants to be a victim, as he did with Linda. He decides to take full responsibility for Rebecca's safety and begins to develop a plan to neutralize this threat. But their lives are thrown into even more chaos when this mysterious man attacks Anthony right on the street. He manages to fight him off, but the threat becomes real. Now, it is not just stalking, but a direct attempt to kill. Rebecca and Anthony realize they need to hide. They decide to leave town and disappear from this man's sight for a while. They plan to do everything quickly and quietly so that no one knows where they are going. Leaving their homes and their normal lives behind, they head to a small town where they rent a house and try to start over. However, the enemy is not going to retreat. He finds them and comes for them. One night, when Rebecca is already going to bed, she hears a noise outside the window. It is not just a noise. It is someone who has already penetrated their shelter. Anthony immediately wakes up and understands that they are in danger again. He grabs the phone and tries to call the police, but the connection is interrupted. The stranger forces his way into the house, and a fierce struggle ensues. Anthony and Rebecca do everything they can to protect themselves, but the man is driven by more than just revenge. He is driven by the idea of finishing Linda's job, her final mission. At the climax, as he prepares the killing blow, an unexpected twist occurs. The police finally arrive in time, and officers burst into the house. Linda's mysterious stalker tries to escape, but fails. He is arrested. When he is taken into custody, he still whispers, "I did it for her." This man turns out to be as obsessed as Linda herself, which frightens Rebecca and Anthony even more. They realize that they are dealing with something more dangerous than just evil revenge. It was a whole network of people ready to do anything for Linda. Anthony and Rebecca are finally freed from this deadly threat, but the scars, both physical and emotional, will remain with them forever. The murder Linda sought did not take place, but the price for this confrontation was too high. This part of the script reveals Linda's final attempts, even behind bars, to influence the lives of Rebecca and Anthony. Her evil plan lives on through her devoted assistant, who almost completes her bloody intent. After the man who worked for Linda is arrested, Anthony and Rebecca can finally breathe a sigh of relief. The stalker, whose name soon becomes known as Michael Harris, turns out to be Linda's loyal ally, whom she had secretly been using in her schemes. Michael, it turns out, was as obsessed with Linda as she was with Anthony and was ready to carry out her vengeful plan to the end, even after her arrest. However, his arrest becomes the final point in this sinister plot, which almost cost Rebecca and Anthony their lives. Anthony and Rebecca are left in shock at how deeply Linda manipulated not only them but others as well. For both of them, this event becomes the final realization of how terrible obsession can be. They both realize that they have been through something that has changed them forever. Now that Michael is behind bars, they face a long road to recovery, both physically and mentally. Rebecca decides to leave town for good and start a new life, somewhere far from all the horrors she has endured. She understands that in order to fully recover, she needs to leave everything behind: the past, old places, and even people who remind her of pain and fear. Anthony supports her decision, understanding that this is the best path for her. They both say goodbye on an emotional note, realizing that their paths in life have diverged, but grateful for supporting each other during the most difficult moment. Anthony, remaining in the city, decides to start his life from scratch. He signs up for psychological therapy to deal with the consequences of what Linda did to his life. He realizes that he needs to restore his sense of independence and self-confidence, which Linda has almost destroyed. He no longer wants to be a victim, and therapy becomes an important step in this direction for him. He also decides to reconnect with his family and old friends, whom he has alienated due to Linda's influence. Linda Carson, meanwhile, continues to serve her time in prison. Her condition is gradually deteriorating. The mental disorders caused by her obsession are now diagnosed by doctors. She is put into a regime of strict isolation and therapy, trying to understand her deep-seated problems. Linda is no longer the confident woman she once was. Her mind is split, and she lives in a world of illusions, still believing that Anthony will return to her. Over time, her name is forgotten and the media stops covering her case. She remains only in the memories of those whose lives she destroyed. The obsession that consumed her led to complete isolation and decline, and now Linda is a mere shadow of the person she once was. Life is slowly returning to normal for Rebecca. She finds a new home in another state where no one knows about her past. She is surrounded by new friends and begins to slowly rebuild her career. However, the past still haunts her in the form of nightmares and occasional flashes of fear when she feels vulnerable. Despite this, she is determined to never let fear control her life again. Anthony, having recovered from his physical wounds, returns to his normal life. He still feels guilty about what happened, but now he understands that he was a victim of manipulation and that he too deserves forgiveness and a chance at a new life. He continues to work on himself and build healthy, honest relationships based on trust and respect. Anthony decides to volunteer, helping others who have experienced similar trauma. This gives him a sense of fulfillment and helps him move forward. For both Rebecca and Anthony, it is a time of healing. They understand that life after trauma does not return to the previous state, but new strength and motivation for the future can be found. They never cross paths again, but each of them knows that this terrible period of their lives became a lesson for them, painful but important. This story shows how far obsession can go and what destructive consequences it can lead to. However, The ending also gives hope that even the darkest situations can be overcome with dignity and the ability to rebuild one's life.